As I mentioned in the last lecture, one of the 10 emanations of Lord Vishnu, one of the main Hindu gods, was Buddha. And so Buddhism arises out of Hinduism and becomes a major religion in the East. And so we're going to talk about Buddhism for a little bit. Um, there are some fundamental differences between Hinduism and Buddhism, but there is also a lot that they have in common. We'll talk a little bit about the teachings and about the history of the person whom we know as Buddha. Okay. Just to give you an idea of how big this movement is, the religion of Buddhism in the world, you can see the first 6 countries that are mentioned here on this map. I'll make it a little bigger for you. Are countries in which at least 55% of the population, in other words, over half, are followers of Buddha. And so these would be the dominant countries. And you can see that I have highlighted those in yellow on the map. And then the countries listed down below, 1 through 10, beginning with Japan, constitute countries in which somewhere between 10 and 55% of the population would be Buddhist. So all in all, about 7% of the world's population is Buddhist. That's a big chunk of the population. Now, just like there are different kinds of Christianity, if you will, there are different kinds of Buddhism. When I say the word Christian, you think, okay, well, there are Catholics, and even though we may not consider them true born-again Christians, if they're following true Catholic doctrine, they still fall into the category of Christian because they are followers of Christ by creed and claim the Bible as their authority. And I realize there's more to it than that, but they would be considered under the head of Christianity. Then there are evangelicals, there are Pentecostals, you have Reformed Christians, you have dispensational Christians. So, Christianity is also characterized by a number of different persuasions within or under the umbrella term. And that's true of Buddhism as well. Buddhism is considered one of the 3 missionary religions in the world, religions that seek to win converts. Of the religions that we study in this course, most of them really aren't concerned about winning others. They're adherents of their own faith. They encourage others to follow them, but it's really not a mandate or a burden for them to try and win the world to their religion. But in terms of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, that is the case. They are the 3 religions that seek to win followers. And of course, Christianity does so on the basis of the Great Commission that Jesus gave to his disciples just before he departed from the earth. Let me blow this up for you as well. When we talk about Buddhism, there are 3 primary divisions of Buddhism. And again, even within these divisions, you would find other variations. But by and large, people who think of Buddhism will think of these 3. The orange area is what is called Vajrayana Buddhism. It contains probably the smallest group of Buddhists. The Mahayana, the yellow group, contains the largest portion. I'll give you some percentages here in just a moment. And then Theravada Buddhists are the 3rd group. As you can see, they're more in South India, and they're also a very considerable group, although not as large as the Mahayana group. Now, those 3 terms may mean absolutely nothing to you, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of meat to put on these bones to help you understand more what they're talking about. But first, in terms of the percentage of adherents, you can see that the Mahayana group is the largest. That's the group that was the yellow, and that is largely because of the country of China. Even though China politically calls itself, an atheist country, there is a lot of Buddhism, at least nominally, in the country of China. Then Theravada Buddhism, which is in South India, in that red area we looked at, uh, consists of about 38% of all Buddhists. And then the Vajrayana one is the smallest of all. It's very limited to certain regions and people groups. And I'll show you on a map how that plays out here in just a moment. But there are approximately 470 million Buddhists in the world. We said earlier that it's about 7% of the world's population. Again, these are all guesstimates, but at least it gives you a big picture idea as to how large the religion of Buddhism actually is. So let's take a closer look at these three types of Buddhism to give you an idea of what they're all about. Theravada, that's the one down there, and I placed that map back in here so you can see it again. Down in the southern part of India, which includes Burma, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and then Sri Lanka down there at the bottom of India. These would be those who hold to probably the strictest form of Buddhism. And remember when we studied Hinduism that we talked about the Sanskrit language being that ancient language that became the basis for the Vedas, the ancient scriptures of Hinduism. Well, in Buddhism, the Pali language actually became the major language. And the Pali language was a more common language, and it was used for the teachings of the elders to the common people, whereas Sanskrit was a more limited language. I guess probably one way to compare that would be to think of the first century Roman Empire, where Latin was spoken mostly in Rome, and it was used for military and political purposes, but Greek was spoken by the majority of people. Sanskrit and Pali could be compared, at least to some degree, in that way. Sanskrit being the more limited, restricted language used only by the Brahmin priests in Hinduism, and Pali, the more popular language, was used by Buddhists. And part of the reason for that is because Buddhism traveled and expanded in large part through trade, commerce, people traveling to do their business and so forth. And Pali was the popular language used in that part of the world, and that facilitated the spread of Buddhism to other places. The Theravada school is one of the earliest schools, and you see I call it the Southern School there because it really takes in the countries there in red in South Asia. It takes in about 70% of Southeast Asians, and so it's a large percentage. It is also called Hinayana, so just to confuse you a little bit more here, Theravada and Hinayana refer to the same sect of Buddhism, and that word Hinayana means small vehicle due to its narrow view of self-reliance in gaining liberation. There's a whole lot to that, but in a nutshell, the idea there is that nobody can help you to gain enlightenment and to get out of this samsara cycle. You have to accomplish it yourself. And it's a very strict teaching. It's a very narrow view of how to get out of enlightenment. Whereas the Mahayana, the one represented by the yellow countries there, and primarily China, teaches that you can have help from others in getting out of the samsara cycle. And there are other ways that you can accomplish that beyond what the narrow Theravada teaching tells its followers. So Mahayana means great vehicle, in contrast to the small vehicle, a narrow view of how you can be freed from reincarnation. Great vehicle says there are other ways to do it. And so, as you can imagine, Mahayana Buddhism would become more popular because it would make it possible or easier for more people to gain enlightenment and enter into ultimate reality, or their ultimate destiny. So yes, it's much more popular, letter A. Letter B, Several forms and techniques for gaining liberation are permitted in Mahayana Buddhism. And then the third one is Vajrayana. And even though it represents a large portion, a large amount of real estate, if you will, as we saw before, it really only includes about 6% of all Buddhists. And it's called the diamond vehicle. It refers to Tibetan Buddhism. It really sprouted in in Tibet, and so it was very limited, even though it represents a large area of geography. It really doesn't take in the majority of the population in those regions. It emphasizes mystical practices, mantras, which are things that you repeat, sayings you repeat over and over again to help prepare you to be illuminated and enlightened and get out of the samsara cycle, chants, and that sort of thing. It employs elements of Mahayana, but also of a religion called Bon, which was an indigenous Tibetan religion. Again, I'm only giving you some very, very general information. You really need to do some reading on your own or take a non-Christian religions course to dive into it even a little more deeply. I always tell my students at the beginning of the semester in this course, when we finish, we will all be kindergartners in our understanding. Because for each of these religions, and for that matter, for each of these types of Buddhism, there is so much more to be said and so much variation within them that we are only just scratching the surface when we talk about these truths. And I don't say that to discourage you from studying it. I say that just to remind you that we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg when we talk about these major ideas within these religious systems. I'll just briefly introduce the founder of Buddhism, and then we'll come back to him in the next lecture. His name is Siddhartha Gautama. He's known to us as Buddha, and we'll see why in just a little bit. But let me just say something about him before we come back in the next lecture. When it comes to historical people and events associated with religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism, the Eastern religions, historical accuracy is really not an important element. In other words, there are some people who would actually doubt whether an actual historical person named Siddhartha Gautama really lived, or whether it's just a legend that became adopted and embraced by the followers of Buddhism. Now, you and I would say, well, man, that doesn't give you very much assurance then that you're following a genuine religion. In Christianity, we make a big deal of the historical veracity, the accuracy of times and places and events, and and the Bible presents a narrative that speaks of actual places and actual people. But in Eastern religions, that isn't so important. It's what they taught or what they were alleged to have taught, were supposed to have taught, that really matters. Let me give you a simple illustration that probably doesn't do it justice, but at least it'll get you on the track. Many of you have heard the story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, okay? And, then when he's confronted about it, he tells his parents, "I cannot tell a lie. Yes, I chopped down the cherry tree." Well, the fact is, nobody has ever really proven or substantiated historically that actually happened. We suppose that it probably did, but we as Americans aren't so concerned about whether George Washington actually did chop down a cherry tree and then had to be honest about it or not, because whether it happened or not, it's a story that we like to tell because it typifies what we believe George Washington was. He was honest, he was a man of integrity. And so even we as Americans will sometimes embrace certain legends, whether or not we believe those stories actually can be proved to have happened. because they depict the kind of person or political situation or religious idea or whatever it is that we're trying to promote. And that's the case with Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. And so we'll talk about the story as it's told, but just with the understanding that whether or not he really lived and whether or not that all really happened in relation to his life, it can't be proved and isn't really a matter of urgent importance to the average Buddhist.